Hello, friends. Today we're continuing with this book, Beauty and Imitation by Daniel McInerny on the philosophy of art. And so far, we looked at the introduction or the preface. We looked at chapter one and chapter two. Chapter one was talking about art as mimesis, that art imitates something. That's sort of the primary philosophy of art that he's dealing with here, Aristotelian Thomistic. And then chapter two is about what is imaged, right? Ultimately, it's like the human experience, these things that we go through in life that are being portrayed for us. It's a different kind of knowledge. It's a different kind of experiencing of things. It's, philosophy and art are both interested in the truth and helping us to know, helping us to learn about the reality of the human condition. They just go about it in different ways. In chapter three, he's going to advance his thesis and he's going to talk about story as a moral argument, that there are arguments about the way that we ought to behave as humans, what is good for us, and ultimately the thing that we're all after, human happiness, right? And so he begins with Flannery O'Connor, famous story writer, mostly short stories, a couple of novels, and she's talking about stories and the way that they convince, and distinguishing between the theme of a work and the meaning of the work. Themes, sometimes people say, well, what's the theme of the book? And then people try to sum it up. And but the way that she says it, she doesn't like that, because it's almost like if you could pick out the theme, it would be like a string, and you undo the string, and then this whole bag opens up, and that sort of like gives you access to everything that's in the story. You're saying that's not. She likes to talk about it more in terms of meaning. What's the meaning of the story? Ultimately, though, the meaning of the story, even if it can be, you can articulate what the meaning is. The real meaning of the story is the story itself. She says this: a story is a way of saying something that can't be said in any other way, and it takes every word in the story to say what the meaning is. You tell a story because a statement would be inadequate. When anybody asks what a story is about, the only proper thing to do is tell them to read the story. So there's a kind of experiential knowledge that is given by the story. Theoretical statements about the story are never a substitute for the story itself. There is a thing that we can refer to as experiential truth. So again, McInerny says, yet we should never treat theoretical statements about a story as capable of delivering the full meaning of a story. Again, quoting Flannery O'Connor, he says, the meaning of fiction is not abstract meaning, but experienced meaning. So this idea that there is experiential truth. And a term that I have found useful in talking about this kind of philosophy of art is that there's an encounter. The work of art seeks to create an encounter that is a copy of some aspect of reality in the human experience. Here he calls it experiential truth. The next section, uh, he talks about the poetic syllogism. So the way a syllogism works is it's a logical argument, the way that we talk about it in philosophy, right? There are some premises and there's a conclusion, and it's a purely logical, deductive kind of thing. But in stories, there's a kind of syllogism. He calls it the poetic syllogism. It doesn't work in the same kind of a way where the author just lays out logically, but there is an argument that's being made. He says this: stories make arguments. They put forward reasons in an effort to persuade us of the truth of a certain proposition. This is what we are recognizing when we talk about the argument of a play, the point of a novel, and the moral of a story. In philosophy, the way that a logical syllogism would work is that you have statements. In a work of art, though, in a story in particular, he's talking about here, and ultimately, he argues that all art is a story of some kind. It's presenting some kind of a story. The way that a story works is that the images that are produced are the syllogisms. The encounters, the experiential truths are themselves arranged in a way to argue for the argument, the thing that the story is trying to present. And again, we can articulate that. We can watch a movie, we can read a novel, and then say, "Oh, this is what the point is. The protagonist did this, and this was the situation, and therefore that was the right thing to do." But again, that abstraction from the story is not the meaning of the story itself, right? The meaning of the story is that experiential kind of convincing that we have. For example, he gives the example of Macbeth, and he says this idea that ruthless ambition leads to destruction. Right? That's what Macbeth does. He hears these predictions, right? These prophecies, and then he gives into this ruthless ambition, sort of goaded by his wife, and then ruthless ambition, and it just ruins everything. And so ruthless ambition leads to destruction. Again, it's one thing to say that, it's another to experience it. Another example that I like to use from Shakespeare is Othello. If you're familiar with it, Iago is Othello's friend, and Iago deceives Othello, and then everybody dies or they're arrested. Just so it's one thing to learn to memorize the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. It's another thing to experience the play of Othello and to hate the deception of Iago. The next section presents the idea of every story having a controlling idea, right? And the story is sort of the proof of the controlling idea. And in the controlling idea, you've got two things that are combined: a value and a cause. The value is what is good or what is evil, the perspective on this particular thing, and the cause is what brings that about in the story, right? Um, and and again, this is all done through experience. It's not just through logical, deductive kind of arguments, right? Storytellers don't explain; they make a creative demonstration of the truth, right? Philosophers are the ones who try to explain, and we're forever trying to do it, and it can get complicated, and a lot of times people don't listen anyway. But stories are convincing in a different kind of a way, right? Through these creative demonstrations of a truth. And the truths are these mimetic universals, these truths about human life, about human experience, the challenges, the joys, the failures. And it's those things that are presented to us, and then we are convinced that that is a beautiful thing, or that is a very ugly thing. The next section talks about story as dramatized dialectical debate. So dialectical debate is, when you've got two people having an argument, discussion, you've got two sides of an issue, and they're going back and forth, and they're having this discussion. In a story, what you have is this controlling idea, this value, and then there's the value and the counter value that seem to play back and forth against each other. And the question is, who's going to win? And then we're going to see the result. We're going to experience the result of the value or the counter value sort of prevailing in the end. So it's sort of the truth and the reality. So the reality and the appearance of a value, right? So what is this thing that we're really after? What's the thing? Ambition. What does that really look like? And then what are the false images of ambition, right? And then what Macbeth does is that it reveals the truth about ruthless ambition. Macbeth gets wrapped up in maybe this appearance of ambition, what he thinks it's going to be, and this glory and happiness and the kind of life that he's going to live. And then in reality, the truth of ruthless ambition is revealed through the play. And so one of the other things that stories do is that they help us to explore this idea of what is happiness. Aristotle's Ethics, the whole book can be summarized as a search for the nature of true happiness. And in the beginning, he goes through a lot of different ideas about happiness. He doesn't just begin, here's a definition of happiness. He spends a lot of time exploring, this is what this person has said about happiness. This is what this person has said about happiness. Some people say that it's wealth. Some people say that it's pleasure. Some people say that it's honor. And he explores every one of those ideas. That's what literature does. That's what stories, that's what art in general does for us. Explores this idea of happiness, this thing that we're all after in this human experience that we have, and it gives us, you could say, these encounters with these different forms of happiness, these different things that people think are going to make them happy, the appearance of happiness, and then hopefully helping us to understand and pursue the true happiness, right? And so the protagonist's job is to sift through all those appearances. That's the job of the protagonist, and to find what is the truth of this value that they're after, and the controlling idea of the story. And hopefully, right, they want to find true happiness and fulfillment, but it doesn't always happen, right? And that's one of the distinguishing characteristics between, say, classical, a tragedy, and a comedy. In comedy, in the end, they find it and they achieve that happiness. And in tragedy, um, they don't, and there's destruction and lives are destroyed. So these are interesting things to keep in mind as you're watching a movie, as you're reading a book. What are these controlling ideas? But again, be careful not to pull too much into the abstraction and live in the abstraction. Remember that the main goal of the author isn't for you to have this abstraction, it's to create this experience and then have the experiential truth of that controlling idea, of that value, and of that protagonist's search for happiness. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, there's a link to the book, and share this with others if you're finding it helpful in understanding the book.